Settle in, everyone. What you need to know before this starts. A hunter's compound sat for 11 years at the edge of Ironhold territory, and 11 years is a long time for a king to know something is wrong and do nothing about it. He had reasons. The council had reasons. There are always reasons. Then a woman arrived at dawn with a blade and no permission, and by the time the sun had climbed to noon, the reasons were ash. Her name was Wren. She came to map contested territory, not to start a war. The Alpha King Soren had ruled Ironhold for 9 years with the kind of stillness that people mistook for peace. It wasn't peace. Let's begin. The cartographer's case was heavier than it looked. Wren had carried it across 3 territories in 6 days, and the brass instruments inside had shifted during the last river crossing, so the weight sat wrong against her hip. She adjusted the strap at the Ironhold gate without breaking stride because stopping looked like hesitation. And hesitation at a pack border was the kind of thing that invited questions she didn't have answers for. The gate guard was a young wolf with a jaw that hadn't finished deciding what shape it wanted to be. He looked at her papers, then at her, then at the cartographer's guild seal on the case, and took long enough doing it that she had time to count the iron rivets in the gate behind him. 43 before he handed her papers back. Mapping commission, he said. It wasn't a question, but it wanted to be. Border survey, 3 weeks. She took the papers. The council authorized it in the spring. He let her through. The inner courtyard of Ironhold Keep was larger than the maps she'd been given suggested. The old survey was off by at least 30 feet on the eastern wall, which was the kind of error that accumulated into something dangerous over contested ground. She noted it without stopping, already building the correction in her head, and that was why she didn't see the wolf until she was almost past it. It was enormous. Not in the way that pack wolves were large, which was already considerable. This was something else. A gray-black animal the size of a draft horse's foal, lying in the shadow of the keep's main arch with its head on its paws, watching the courtyard with the particular stillness of something that had been watching for a long time and had not yet found anything worth moving for. Wren stopped. The wolf's eyes tracked to her. She held very still, the way her father had taught her. Not frozen, not braced, just present, weight even, hands visible. The wolf regarded her for a moment that had no comfortable length. Then it lifted its head. Behind her, she heard the gate guard pull a breath. She didn't turn to look. She kept her eyes on the wolf, not challenging, not submitting, just looking back. The wolf stood. It was even larger upright. It crossed the courtyard in a slow, deliberate walk that brought it to arm's length from her, and then it sat, and then, with a weight that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than muscle, it lowered its head until its muzzle nearly touched the stone. The courtyard went very quiet. Wren did not move. From somewhere above her, from one of the high windows of the keep, she had the distinct and unverifiable feeling of being watched. Not by the wolf, by something that was trying very hard not to react. She filed it away without knowing why. The room they gave her was in the east wing, which was cold in the mornings and faced the wrong direction for the light she needed to work by. She moved the table herself, dragging it to the window that faced north, and spread her first survey sheets before the footsteps in the corridor outside had finished passing. The work was real. That was important to her. The commission was legitimate, the guild seal was genuine, and the border survey was something Ironhold actually needed, even if the council had agreed to it, primarily because it gave them leverage in the spring boundary dispute with the Thornvale holdings. Wren had done work for 3 different parties who all believed they were getting something the others weren't. She was used to it. She kept her maps accurate and her opinions to herself, and everyone went home with what they'd paid for. She was 3 hours into the first survey sheet when someone knocked. "Come in," she said without looking up. The woman who entered was perhaps 60, with the kind of posture that came from decades of choosing it deliberately. She wore Ironhold colors, gray and iron black, and carried a tray with tea and bread that she set on the far end of the table with the efficiency of someone who had been setting trays on tables for 40 years and found no reason to make it complicated. "The king's steward asked me to see you settled," the woman said. "I'm Marta. If you need anything for the work, you ask me, not the council clerks. They'll send you the wrong thing and take 3 days to do it." Wren looked up. "Thank you, Marta." "You're the one who didn't flinch." Marta was already at the door. "When the king's wolf came to you in the courtyard." I flinched on the inside. Something shifted in Marta's expression. Not quite a smile. Close enough. "The last surveyor they sent flinched on the outside. He left before dinner." She paused at the threshold. "The wolf hasn't done that before. Gone to someone. You should know that." She left before Wren could ask what she meant. The king's wolf had a name, she learned. Ash. The pack used it quietly, the way you used a name that belonged to something larger than naming. She learned other things in those first 2 days, the way you learned things in a working household, in fragments between tasks, from people who assumed she already knew, and were therefore more forthcoming than they'd have been if she'd asked directly. The compound at the eastern border was 11 years old. The hunters who ran it were not Ironhold wolves, not pack-affiliated, not technically on Ironhold land. They sat on a strip of disputed territory that the spring boundary survey was, in part, meant to resolve. The council had been managing it through diplomatic channels. There had been letters. There had been responses to the letters. The compound had been there for 11 years. She filed it away. On the second afternoon, she was in the lower corridor mapping the interior dimensions of the keep's eastern foundation when Ash found her. The wolf came around the corner without sound and sat at the far end of the corridor, watching her work. She acknowledged it with a glance and went back to her measurements. After a while, the wolf moved closer, then closer still, until it was sitting near enough that she could feel the warmth of it against her side while she knelt to mark a measurement at floor level. She did not make it strange. She kept measuring. "You're not supposed to be down here," said a voice from the corridor entrance. She looked up. The man in the doorway was tall, with the kind of stillness she'd already learned to associate with Ironhold, but more so, the way a tuning fork was more so than the surface it was struck against. Gray eyes, a jaw that had made its decision years ago and not revisited it. He was dressed plainly for a king, which was how she knew he was one. Ash had not moved. "The Foundation survey is part of the commission," Wren said. She kept her voice even. "The eastern wall measurements are off on the existing maps. If I'm correcting the border survey, I need accurate interior references." A pause, the kind that had weight in it. "The commission covers the exterior border," he said. "The commission covers the survey." She held up the guild document without breaking eye contact. "The language is broad, intentionally, I think, since whoever drafted it knew the interior measurements would affect the boundary calculations." The silence stretched. "You're the one Ash went to," he said finally. "Yes." He looked at the wolf. Ash looked back at him with the particular expression of an animal that had made a decision and was not interested in revisiting it. "Finish the foundation measurements," Soren said. Flat and final, no explanation offered, none needed. He turned and walked back down the corridor, and she listened to his footsteps until they were gone. She went back to work. But she was counting her brass pins, and she noticed when she stopped. On the third morning, she went east. Not to the compound. She wasn't there yet, didn't have enough of the survey complete to justify it. But to the tree line at the edge of the disputed territory, where the old boundary markers were sunk in ground that had shifted enough over the years to make their positions genuinely ambiguous. She worked for 4 hours in the cold, driving new stakes and recording positions, and she was packing up her instruments when she heard it. She stopped. The sound came from the direction of the compound, which was another half-mile east through the pines. It was the kind of sound that didn't resolve easily. Not quite an animal sound. Not quite not. She stood for a moment with her hand on the cartographer's case and her weight balanced the way her father had taught her, and she listened. Then she made a decision. She left the case at the base of a marked tree and went east. The compound was larger than she'd expected from the description she'd gathered. A main building, 2 outbuildings, a fence of iron stakes driven into the frozen ground at intervals that told her someone had built this with the intention of staying. The gate was padlocked. The 2 guards at the gate were facing inward, which meant they were watching the compound, not the approach, which told her something about what they were afraid of. She went around the fence. The outbuilding at the north end had a gap between 2 iron stakes where the ground had heaved with frost. It was narrow. She went through it sideways, scraping her shoulder on the iron, and landed in the mud on the other side. The sound was louder here. It was coming from the outbuilding. She didn't let herself think too carefully about what she was doing. Thinking too carefully was how you talked yourself out of things. She moved along the wall to the outbuilding door, which was bolted from the outside with a simple iron bar, and she lifted the bar and opened the door. The smell hit her first. Then her eyes adjusted. 9 pups, the oldest perhaps 4 months, the youngest barely weaned. They were in wire cages stacked too high, and some of the cages were too small, and some of the pups had wounds that hadn't been treated, and all of them had the particular stillness of animals that had learned that noise made things worse. Wren stood in the doorway for exactly 3 seconds. Then she pulled the blade from her boot and started cutting wire. She had 7 free before the guard came. He was not one of the gate guards. He came from the main building, which meant she'd been heard, which meant she had less time than she'd thought. He was larger than her and had the particular confidence of someone who had never had to doubt whether he could handle a situation. She put herself between him and the pups. He had a club. She had a boot knife and the iron bar she'd picked up from the door. He was faster than he looked. She was faster than he expected. The first swing caught her across the left shoulder, and she went down on one knee, and she thought very clearly, "Get up," and she did. The iron bar connected with the side of his knee. He went down. She didn't wait to see how far down. She went back to the cages. She had all 9 free and was moving them toward the gap in the fence, carrying 2 of the smallest, the others following with the particular desperate trust of animals who had decided she was the best available option. When the second guard came around the corner, she was calculating whether she could make the gap before he reached her when the guard stopped. Then he took a step back. Then the ground shook slightly with the weight of something very large moving very fast. Ash came over the fence, not through the gap, over. The wolf cleared the iron stakes with a foot to spare and landed between Wren and the guard with a sound like a door slamming shut. The guard did not need further information. He was gone. Ash turned to look at her. She looked back, 2 pups in her arms, 7 more clustered at her feet, blood running from her shoulder where the club had connected hard enough to split the skin through her coat. "Thank you," she said. The wolf moved to her left side, and they walked out together. She was back at the tree line, pups distributed between her arms and the satchel she'd improvised from her coat when Soren arrived. He came from the direction of the keep with 4 wolves at his back, and he pulled up short when he saw her. His gaze moved from her to the pups to the blood on her shoulder to Ash, standing at her side with the particular satisfaction of an animal whose plan had come together. The silence had a quality she hadn't encountered before. "The compound," she said. "Eastern outbuilding. 9 pups in wire cages. 1 guard incapacitated. Knee injury, he'll need it looked at. 1 guard fled." She shifted the weight of the pup in her left arm. The fence has a gap at the north end where the frost heaved the ground. The padlock on the main gate is a Velder pattern lock, which means whoever supplied it has a relationship with the Thornvale holdings, which is relevant to your boundary dispute. Soren looked at her for a long moment. "You went in alone," he said. "I went in before I thought about it too carefully." She met his eyes. "That's usually how these things work." Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. He turned to the 4 wolves behind him and said 2 words, flat and final. They moved east at a pace that was no longer a walk. He turned back to her. "Can you walk?" he said. "I've been walking. Back to the keep. Can you walk back to the keep?" She looked down at the pup in her right arm, which had fallen asleep with its nose tucked under her chin. "Yes," she said, "but I'm not putting them down." He didn't argue. He walked beside her, and Ash walked on her other side, and they went back to the keep in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which was itself a kind of information. By noon the compound was ash. She heard it from the keep's eastern window. Not the fire itself, which was too far, but the wolves howling in response to it, a sound that moved through the pack like a wave and settled into something that felt like exhaling. She was in the healer's room, having the shoulder wound cleaned and stitched by a woman named Dara, who had the hands of someone who had done this a great many times, and she watched the smoke rise above the tree line and counted the pups, which were currently distributed across the healer's floor in a pile of sleeping and half-sleeping bodies. "He's never done that before," Dara said, tying off a stitch with the efficiency of long practice. "Razed a compound? Moved that fast." Dara cut the thread. "The council has been managing that situation for 11 years. He had it done in a morning." Wren watched the smoke. "What changed?" she asked, though she thought she knew. Dara looked at her with an expression that suggested the question was either very innocent or very deliberate, and wasn't sure which. "You'd have to ask him," she said. She tied off the bandage. "He'll come tonight. He always checks the wounded." He came at dusk. She was sitting with her back against the healer's room wall, the smallest pup asleep in her lap. The survey notes she'd managed to salvage from her coat spread across the floor around her, because the day had happened, but the work still needed doing. She heard his footsteps in the corridor. She recognized them now, which was information she noted without examining, and she didn't look up when the door opened. He stood in the doorway for a moment. "The healer says the shoulder is clean," he said. "The healer is correct." She made a notation on the survey sheet. 3 stitches. I've had worse. A pause. "Where?" he said. She looked up then. He was leaning against the door frame with his arms crossed, and his expression was the controlled one, the one that gave nothing away, but his eyes were doing something different. The kind of watching that wasn't surveillance. "Border survey in the Eastern Marches 4 years ago," she said. "A dispute over a marker stone became a dispute over something else. I was in the wrong place." She looked back at her notes. "I finished the survey." He was quiet for long enough that she looked up again. "The compound," he said. 11 years. She waited. "The council had a process," he said. Each word picked up and examined before being set down. The disputed territory made direct action politically complicated. There were implications for the spring boundary negotiations. "I understand," she said. "I work in contested territories. I understand the calculus. I let the calculus run for 11 years. She looked at him steadily. Yes. It was not an absolution, and she didn't offer it as one. He seemed to understand that because something in his posture shifted. Not collapse, nothing so dramatic. The stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing. "The pups will need placement," he said. "I know. I was going to ask you about that. I'll handle it. I'd like to be involved. Another pause. Then, all right. He looked at the smallest pup asleep in her lap. That one's been there since the healer's room, he said. She likes the warmth. Wren looked down at it. She's the youngest, maybe 6 weeks. She shouldn't have been in a cage at all. The silence stretched. No, he said. She shouldn't have. He pushed off the door frame. Eat something. Marta will bring a tray. He paused. The survey. You can continue it. I know, she said. The commission is still valid. I wasn't... He stopped. Something that was not quite an expression crossed his face. I meant the interior measurements. You can continue those as well. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said. He left. She listened to his footsteps until they turned the corner, and then she went back to her notes, and she noticed that she had stopped counting the stitches in the bandage. On the 4th day, the council asked to see her. She had been expecting it. The council chamber was a long room with a table that had been built for a different era's politics and hadn't been replaced, which told her something about how Ironhold related to its own history. There were 7 council members. 6 of them looked at her with the careful neutrality of people managing a situation. The 7th, a man named Aldrich, with the smooth voice of someone who had learned that smooth voices were more effective than loud ones, looked at her with something that was almost sympathy. The Guild Commission is not in question, Aldrich said. Your work here is legitimate. We simply want to ensure you understand the context. The compound, she said. The compound was a complicated diplomatic matter. The Alpha King's response this morning was decisive. We want to ensure that the circumstances which prompted that response are clearly understood. She looked at him. You want to ensure I understand that what I did caused a political problem. We want to ensure you understand the full picture. I understand the full picture, she said. 9 pups in wire cages on disputed land. One of them 6 weeks old. She set her hands flat on the table. The full picture was in that outbuilding. Aldrich's smooth voice remained smooth. The Alpha King has certain obligations to the pack, to the political structure, to the relationships that allow Ironhold to function. Actions taken without council sanction, however well-intentioned, can... I'm not a pack member, she said. I'm not subject to council sanction. I'm a guild cartographer on a legitimate commission. She met his eyes. If the Alpha King chose to respond to what I found, that's between the Alpha King and his council. Silence. You're quite direct, Aldrich said. I find it saves time. She was standing to leave when the door opened. Soren came in without announcement, which told her he'd been in the corridor and had made a decision about timing. He looked at the council, then at her, then at Aldrich, with an expression that was entirely flat. The compound is done, he said. The political complications from the compound's existence were larger than the political complications of removing it. That's the analysis. If the council wants to discuss the spring boundary negotiations in light of the new survey data, I'll schedule that meeting. He paused. The cartographer's commission continues. She has access to the full interior. Aldrich looked at him for a moment. Of course, my king. Soren looked at her. A question in it, not spoken. She gave him the smallest nod. They walked out together, which she suspected was not incidental. In the corridor, he said, They'll try again. I know, she said. They'll find a procedural angle. They usually do. He was walking beside her, not quite at her pace, which meant he was slowing down. You handled it. I've been in rooms like that before. She adjusted the cartographer's case. Contested territories attract contested politics. You learn to hold your ground without giving them something to push against. He was quiet for a moment. Where did you learn that? he said. My father. He was a surveyor before me. He said the most dangerous thing you could do in a dispute was let the other party define the terms. She glanced at him. He also said that sometimes you just have to go through the gap in the fence. Something happened in his expression. Not quite a smile. The particular, almost quality of a face that had forgotten how. He sounds practical, Soren said. He was. He's dead now. 4 years. She said it plainly because that was how it sat. He taught me to read ground and read people, and he said the skills were the same. They had reached the junction where the corridor split, east toward her room, north toward the keep's main hall. He stopped at the junction. The Pups, he said. I've identified placement for 7 of them. 2 are still unplaced. The smallest 2, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She looked at him. What were you thinking? I was thinking they might stay here. A pause. If you were willing to remain through the full survey period, they're too young to travel. She understood that he was asking more than one thing. The survey will take 3 weeks, she said. Possibly 4, with the interior measurements. That's acceptable. All right, she said. He nodded once, flat and final. He turned north. She went east, and she was 3 steps down the corridor when he said her name. Not her title, not the cartographer. Her name, which she had told him exactly once at the gate in passing. She turned. He was standing at the junction with his hands at his sides, and he looked for just a moment like a man who had said something he hadn't fully planned. Thank you, he said, for the pups. They needed it, she said. She went back to her room. She sat at the table and looked at the survey sheets for a long time before she picked up her pen. On the 6th day, Marta found her in the stables. She had gone there in the early morning because the survey required measurements of the outer buildings, and also because the stables were warm and the pups had discovered this before she had. The smallest one, the 6-week-old she'd started thinking of as Pip, which was not a dignified name but was accurate, had taken to following her at heel, which was not something Wren had encouraged and had apparently not needed to. Marta came in with a look that suggested she had been looking for her specifically. The Dowager is asking for you, Marta said. Wren looked up from her measurement notes. The Dowager. The king's mother. She lives in the south wing. She doesn't come to meals, but she hears everything. Marta's expression was carefully neutral. She's asked to see you. Should I be concerned? She asked to see the last 3 people the king spoke to for more than 5 minutes. Marta paused. She doesn't usually ask twice. The Dowager's rooms were warm and smelled of dried herbs and old paper. She was a small woman who had clearly once been formidable and had not entirely stopped. She looked at Wren with the particular attention of someone cataloging. Sit, she said. Wren sat. You went into the compound alone, the Dowager said. Yes, without telling anyone. There wasn't time to tell anyone. Or I didn't take the time. I'm not certain which. The Dowager regarded her. He burned it down. I heard. He's been looking at that compound for 11 years. The Dowager's voice was precise, each word placed. Every council meeting, every diplomatic letter, every reason the situation was complicated, and then you were in it for an hour, and he had it done by noon. Wren didn't say anything. He had a mate before, the Dowager said. Not gently, not cruelly, simply. She left 3 years ago. She decided the political weight of this territory was more than she wanted. She was not wrong about the weight. A pause. He has not looked at anyone since. I'm not. Wren stopped. I know what you're not, the Dowager said. I'm telling you what I see. I've been watching this keep for 40 years. I know what my son looks like when he's trying not to look at something. She folded her hands. He's trying very hard not to look at you. Wren sat with that for a moment. What are you telling me? She said. I'm telling you that the bond is real, whether or not either of you has named it. The Dowager's eyes were steady. I'm also telling you that he will not name it first. He lost that instinct 3 years ago, and I'm not certain he knows he can trust it again. She paused. I'm not asking you to do anything with this information. I'm simply making sure you have it. She stood, which was clearly a dismissal. The small pup, she said at the door. The one that follows you. What have you named it? Pip, Wren said. It's not a very good name. It suits her, the Dowager said, and she was gone. That night, Wren couldn't sleep. She lay in the east room with the survey sheets spread across the floor and the fire burned down to coals, and Pip a warm weight against her side, and she thought about the Dowager's words with the same methodical attention she gave to survey discrepancies. The bond is real, whether or not either of you has named it. She had felt it. She was honest enough with herself to admit that. The particular pull of him, the way a room reorganized itself around where he was standing, the way she found herself tracking his footsteps in the corridor without deciding to. The way Ash had gone to her in the courtyard before she'd spoken a word to anyone in Ironhold. She had filed it away, repeatedly, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned that feelings that couldn't be acted on were better catalogued than examined. But she was examining it now, in the dark, with the fire low. He will not name it first. She got up. She pulled her coat on over her nightclothes and she went into the corridor. He was in the map room. She had not known there was a map room, but she found it by following the light under a door at the end of the north corridor, and when she pushed the door open, he was there, standing at a table covered in maps, a candle burning low at his elbow. He looked up when she came in. I couldn't sleep, she said. Neither could I. She came to the table. The maps were old, older than the commission she was here for, older than the boundary dispute. They were the kind of maps that told you what a territory had been before it became what it was. She looked at them for a moment. These are pre-council, she said, before the formal boundary system. Yes. He was watching her look at the maps. My grandfather had them made, before the disputed territory was disputed. She found the eastern border on the oldest map. The compound's location was on this map, well inside Ironhold territory, not disputed at all. It was always yours, she said. Yes. The council's process was correct by the current law, he said. The current law is wrong. He said it without heat, which somehow made it heavier. I knew it was wrong. I had the old maps. I let the process run anyway. She looked at him. Why? She said. The silence stretched. He was looking at the map, not at her, and she watched his jaw work slightly. The particular tell she'd catalogued over 6 days. The one that meant he was weighing whether to say the thing he was actually thinking. Because acting on what I knew would have cost more than I was willing to pay, he said, politically. And I had already... He stopped. Already what? She said. He looked at her then. The controlled expression was still there, but something underneath it was pressing against it from the inside. I had already made one decision based on what I felt instead of what was strategic, he said, and it cost me considerably. I decided I wouldn't do it again. She understood what he was not saying. She left, Wren said. She left. And you decided the problem was the feeling, not the person. He was very still. That's one way to describe it, he said. Is it accurate? Another long pause. The candle guttered slightly in a draft from somewhere. Yes, he said. Probably. She looked back at the map, at the eastern border, at the compound's location, clearly inside the old territory line. "You knew about the compound from the beginning," she said. "Not just 11 years ago. You knew what it was." "Yes." "And every year you let the process run, you were also punishing yourself. For the feeling? For what it cost you?" He didn't answer, which was an answer. "Soren," she said. He looked at her. "I went through that fence because I didn't let myself think about it," she said. "You've been thinking about it for 11 years. Both of those things are true, and neither of them is the whole story." She held his gaze. "I'm not her. I'm not going to leave because the territory is heavy. I've been working in heavy territories my whole life." She paused. "But I need you to say it. Not because of the bond, not because Ash chose me in the courtyard, not because your mother told me things this afternoon that I'm not supposed to know she told me, because you see me and you're choosing to say it." The silence had a different quality now. He turned to face her fully, away from the maps. He stood like the room had been built around him, and for a moment he was completely still. Then, "I saw you in the courtyard," he said, "before Ash went to you. I was at the window." Each word precise, deliberate, costing something. "I watched you hold still for him, and I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought, she knows how to wait without bracing, and I thought, I don't remember how to do that." She waited. "The compound," he said, "when you came back with the pups, the blood on your shoulder. I looked at you and I thought, this person went through a fence for 9 animals she had never met, and she's standing there telling me about the padlock like it's survey data." Something shifted in his face. The controlled expression cracked just at the edges. "I've been running this territory for 9 years, and I have never once gone through the fence." "You burned it down by noon," she said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "it's not." He was looking at her with the particular intensity of someone who had been holding something for a very long time and was deciding whether to put it down. "I feel it," he said. "The bond. I've felt it since the courtyard. I've been managing it, the way I manage everything." A pause. "I don't want to manage it." She looked at him steadily. "Then don't," she said. He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps, and he took her face in his hands with the careful precision of someone handling something he was afraid of damaging, and he looked at her for a long moment. Not the controlled look, not the managing look, just his actual eyes, which were gray and very tired, and something else underneath the tired that she thought might be the thing he'd been suppressing for 3 years. "Wren," he said. "Yes," she said, not answering a question. Just, yes. He kissed her with the particular quality of a man who had been talking himself out of something for a long time and had finally stopped. The candle burned lower. Pip had apparently followed her from the east room and was now sitting in the doorway, watching them with the solemn attention of a 6-week-old pup who had decided this was satisfactory. On the 8th day, the council called a formal session. She had known it was coming. Aldrich had the particular expression of a man who had found his procedural angle, and the angle was this. The bond, unregistered and unnamed, was technically a political liability. An unbound cartographer with access to Ironhold's interior survey data and a bond connection to the Alpha King was a security concern. The council had the authority to require formal registration of any bond connection within the keep. It was technically correct. Soren sat at the head of the table with his hands flat on the surface and his expression entirely still, and he let Aldrich finish. Then he said, "You're asking me to formalize the bond." "We're asking you to register it officially," Aldrich said, "for the pack's security." "You're asking me to formalize the bond," Soren said again, flat and final, "in front of witnesses, with the full naming ceremony." A pause. Aldrich had wanted the registration, not the ceremony. The registration was bureaucratic, controllable, small. The naming ceremony was something else. That would be, Aldrich began. Accepted, Soren said. He looked at Wren. She looked back at him. 3 days, he said, if that's enough time. I'll need to finish the Eastern Survey, she said. You can finish the Eastern Survey. Then 3 days is enough time. Aldrich looked between them with the expression of a man who had gotten what he asked for and was not entirely sure how. She finished the Eastern Survey in 2 days. The boundary measurements confirmed what the old maps had shown. The disputed territory was, by the original grant lines, Ironhold land. The compound had been built on Ironhold ground. The spring negotiations would be straightforward, now that the compound was ash and the data was clean. She gave the preliminary findings to the council clerk on the morning of the 3rd day, and then she went to find Soren. He was in the courtyard, which was where she'd started, and Ash was with him, lying in the shadow of the main arch in the same position she'd found him the first morning. She came through the gate with her coat on and her hair loose. She'd left the cartographer's case in her room. And Ash lifted his head and then put it back down with the satisfaction of something whose work was done. Soren watched her cross the courtyard. The survey's filed, she said. I know. The clerk told me. He paused. The boundary findings. Ironholds. The original grant lines are clear. Your lawyers will have an easy spring. Good. He was looking at her with the open look, the one she'd first seen in the map room. She had learned in 2 days that he gave it to her and almost no one else. Are you ready? I've been ready since the map room, she said. You're the one who needed 3 days. The almost smile, closer this time. I needed to get the ceremony right, he said. I've only done this once before and I did it wrong. You didn't do it wrong, she said. She left. That's different. He considered that. Yes, he said. I suppose it is. The pack gathered in the great hall, which was the largest interior space in Ironhold Keep and was, according to the survey measurements Wren had now completed, precisely 41 feet wide and 63 feet long, with a ceiling that caught sound and held it. She stood at the front of the hall in Ironhold colors. Gray, because that was what had been offered and she'd accepted it without fuss, with Pip sitting on her foot, which was not traditional, but which no one had moved to correct. The council was present. The Dowager was present, standing to the left of the hall with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this and was not going to show how much. Marta was in the back, arms crossed, looking satisfied. Dara the healer was there. The gate guard with the unfinished jaw was there, standing very straight. The 7 wolves who had come back from the compound with Soren, and the stable hands who had been feeding the pups, and the kitchen staff who had been sneaking pip scraps for 3 days, and the council clerks, and the pack members she had learned by name, and the ones she hadn't yet. Soren came to stand before her. He was dressed in the formal gray of Ironhold, and he looked like himself, which was the thing she had come to understand was the rarest version of him. Ash moved from the side of the hall and sat beside them both. The hall went very quiet. The naming ceremony was old. She had read about it in the guild's reference materials, pack law, bond formalization, the language that made a private thing public and a public thing permanent. It was short, as these things went. It did not require much. It required saying the true thing in front of witnesses, which was the only thing that had ever been required. Soren looked at her. Wren, he said. Not a title, not a role. Just her name in his voice in front of everyone. I name you, bondmate Ironhold. Mine if you'll have it. The hall was completely still. She looked at him, at the gray eyes that had been watching her since the courtyard, at the jaw that had made its decision, at the man who had burned a compound to ash by noon and stood in a map room at midnight and said, "I don't want to manage it." And she felt the bond settle into something it had been trying to become since the first morning. "Soren," she said, "I name you. Bondmate, I'll have it." The pack exhaled. It moved through the hall like a wave, not the formal bow of ceremony, but the involuntary kind, the kind that came from somewhere below decision. Heads lowering, shoulders dropping. The Dowager closed her eyes briefly. Marta made a sound in the back that she would probably deny later. The gate guard's jaw had finally settled into an expression, and the expression was something like relief. Ash lowered his head once, slowly, and then raised it again. "Done." Pip made a small sound on Wren's foot. Afterward, the hall filled with the noise of a pack that had been holding its breath and could finally stop. Wren stood at the edge of it with a cup of something warm that Marta had pressed into her hand, watching Soren move through his people, not performing, just present, the way she had come to understand he was when he wasn't managing. The Dowager found her. "Well," the Dowager said. "Well," Wren agreed, "he got it right this time." "He did." The Dowager looked at her with the cataloging expression, and then something in it softened. Not much, just a fraction. "You'll finish the survey," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'll finish the survey," Wren said, "and then I'll start the next one. Ironhold's interior maps are 40 years out of date. Someone should fix that." The Dowager's mouth moved. It was the closest thing to a smile Wren had seen from her. "Someone should," she said, and she walked away. That night, the fire was high. Soren sat at the map table in the north room, with the old maps spread before him. Not working, just sitting with them. The way you sat with things that had cost you something and were finally resolved. Wren was at the other end of the table with her survey notes, making the final corrections to the eastern boundary measurements because the work still needed doing. Pip was asleep by the fire. The second small pup, the one they'd started calling Chart because Wren had found him sleeping on her survey sheets twice, was curled against Pip's back. Ash was in the doorway, not guarding, just there, the way a large animal was there when it had decided a place was its place. "The survey," Soren said after a while, "when it's done." She said, not looking up. "You said you'd start the next one." "The interior maps are 40 years out of date." She made a notation. "It's a significant project. Probably a year, if it's done properly." "Probably a year," he said. "Minimum." A pause. "Good," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her with the open look, and something in it was lighter than it had been. Not the weight gone, because weight like that didn't go, but carried differently. Shared, maybe. "You knew," she said. "Before the map room. Before you said it." "Yes." "How long?" He thought about it. "The courtyard," he said. "The first morning, when you held still for Ash." A pause. "I watched you from the window and I thought, there she is. And then I spent 5 days talking myself out of it." "6, she said. "6, he agreed. She went back to her notes. The fire crackled. Pip shifted in her sleep. Outside, the wind had come up, and somewhere in the keep, a door settled on its hinges with the sound of a building that had been standing for a long time and intended to keep standing. "Soren," she said. "Yes." "Next time you're looking at something for 11 years and not doing anything about it." She didn't look up. "Tell me. I'll go through the fence." The silence was the warm kind. "I know you will," he said. "That's the part that worries me." "It shouldn't." "It does, anyway." She smiled at the survey sheet, where he couldn't see it. "That's fair," she said. The fire held. The maps were spread. The pups slept by the hearth, and the great wolf in the doorway finally lay down, and the keep settled around all of them with the particular quiet of a place that had been waiting for something to be resolved and could now at last rest. Pack, I want to ask you something. Soren knew. He knew about the compound from the beginning, and he knew about the bond from the first morning, and he spent 6 days talking himself out of both. Wren went through the fence before she thought about it. Which one of those is braver? Knowing and waiting, or not letting yourself think? Tell me in the comments, because I have a feeling this pack has opinions and I want to hear them. If this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who needed it tonight. That's the best thing you can do for this channel, and it means more than you know. I'll see you in the next one.